One. Welcome to a new edition of Are You Live? Very special guest tonight, Meghan Daum, good friend of mine, former guest on Unregistered, who has lots of things to say because she gets attacked almost daily by very mean people. And we're here to cheer you up, Meghan, because you've been run out of New York City, right? Isn't that what happened?
Oh, I wasn't run out of New York City by mean people. I was greeted by mean people upon running out of New York City.
Yeah, so let's tell this story. So well, first of all, you're a journalist, you're an author, many books, and we'll talk about your most recent book. But you wrote a piece. Well, you left New York City. You live in Manhattan, and you left New York like 5 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago.
It's been 6 weeks.
Yeah,
more than that. It's my 7th week.
And you went to the Hill Country in Virginia, the Appalachia. How do you say it? Appalachia.
The Appalachia, right?
Well, I mean, it's
not Appalachia.
Oh, come on.
Or Appaloosa. Appalachia.
Appaloosa is something else entirely. Isn't that
like a horse?
Yeah, okay. I got that right. So you say Appalachia. So you moved temporarily to the Appalachian Mountains in Virginia.
To the Blue Ridge Mountains. Yeah, actually, I don't want to say the whole part of the reason this got so off the rails was that I didn't want to be specific about my location. So I said Appalachia. No, that's the cat's out of the bag now.
I don't think they're going to find you.
So I live in Manhattan. The beginning of the sort of, acute pandemic panic happened to coincide with my getting a new puppy. And I live in an apartment building, and it was going to be difficult enough to have the puppy. This is not very interesting. I'll just go really quickly through this. Long story short, after much agony and debate, I decided to leave New York. We were starting to have lockdowns and all of that, and I rented an Airbnb, like a farmhouse, and I came down here with a friend. And the thing about it was clear to me that there was this sort of shaming campaign mounting against people who had left New York. And there was this kind of like the moral policing, like you were a better person if you were staying in the city. And I actually did feel really conflicted about it. I have several elderly neighbors that I'm quite close to in my building. And I knew that chances of my getting really sick from this were relatively low, and et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, I decided that it was going to be, here's the puppy now. I decided it was going to be like not worth it. And I would be going in and out of the building, up and down the elevator with this puppy at all hours. People in the building were getting sick. So I decided to come down here with a friend, and I said to myself, well, okay, you can go do this thing and leave the city, but you're not allowed to tell anybody about it because people will shame you, and you're certainly not allowed to write anything about it. And I am the sort of person who ends up writing about everything.
Right.
And so after a couple of weeks here, I found I was in this sort of catatonic state. Like if you've ever had a he was a 10-week-old puppy at that time, a very large 10-week-old puppy because he's a giant breed. And I was just we were in a pasture, but it's not fenced in. And so I was just chasing him around all the time. And it was like this weird state where it felt like the world was ending, and yet I wasn't sleeping because of this puppy, and I had all these thoughts. And I started thinking this would be a really interesting thing to write about, but too bad you can't because you'll be shamed on Twitter, and it's not worth it. And then I finally said to myself, you're so afraid of being shamed on Twitter, but what you should really be ashamed of is the fact that you would not write something that you want to write because of that. And I was actually sort of mad at myself. I was like, my God, man up, honestly. So I wrote the piece. I write a column every other week now for Medium, for Gen Mag, which is one of the Medium magazines. And I even said to my editor, I'm probably going to regret this. And she said, no, write it. So I wrote it, and it was well received. It wasn't necessarily a story about leaving New York. It was a story about staring into the pasture while taking care of a puppy while the world was ending. It was kind of like this weird sort of kind of just meta piece. And people liked it. And then after a few days, somebody got a hold of it, like a sort of social justice Appalachia person, and decided that I was a virus spreader. And not only was I a virus spreader, but I was punching down, just by definition, as a New Yorker writing about this part of the world, there was really nothing I could say that wouldn't be interpreted as a punch down. And it just ignited on Twitter. And it was a combination of she's such a classist, elitist snob, and she's a literal murderer because she came down here from New York and is spreading this virus around. And, the thing is, it was like, it's interesting because it's, I anticipated this and I went ahead and wrote it anyway. And so I was like, I wonder why I sort of bring this down upon myself. And it's also just kind of interesting to think about, like, whether in that kind of situation, if I should have just like stopped in the middle of the column and said, by the way, I quarantined for 14 days before I came down. I quarantined for 14 days after I got here. Like, if I have to just do this like huge throat clearing, not only as a privilege check, but as a kind of, to appease everybody. And it was just, it was sort of this interesting, not only, the Twitter attack was pretty major, although not as major as the one that happened after that. So, it was interesting, but it also just sort of brought, it invited this sort of aesthetic inquiry in my mind. Like, how much time do you spend sort of anticipating these things and heading them off within the course of writing an essay? Or do you just say, screw it and let them have at you? And I'm still not really sure. There's got to be a balance there somewhere. So that's what happened with Appalachia.
So I just want to get the logic of the enemy straight here. What?
Yeah, that's never.
What's the argument?
Yes.
I mean, what were the? I mean, I did see them saying that you were literally a murderer. I saw people, and I saw that Appalachia's social justice person who actually is sort of prominent. She sort of has a following, right?
There's several of them. Yeah. One of them wrote a blog post. Well, and then there ended up being a piece in the Huffington Post about my terrible essay and a couple of other terrible essays, and how it's like, we don't want your leaving New York essays about the pandemic. And again, it was ultimately the message of this Huffington Post piece was, it's okay. If you must leave, it's okay. But the real crime is in admitting it. So at least do us the favor of keeping your shameful act to yourself. That was really the gist of this piece. So, but yes, there was that. And then there were several Appalachia social justice people in the mix.
What on earth could the logic be? It doesn't make any sense because you are doing the maximum social distancing by moving there.
Well,
right?
I mean, I didn't move here. Somebody wanted to know if I was planning to pay taxes, state taxes, while I was down here. I mean, I thought I was going to be down here for like 3 weeks, to be honest with you. I mean, I brought like 2 changes of clothes. It was a little bit, I didn't quite anticipate what this was going to turn into. It's interesting because, Thad, you and I talked about this before in the context of, talking about feminism, for instance. Like, there is this sort of basic principle in a lot of like social justice discussions that if you are addressing any sort of entity other than like a white male or some kind of obviously privileged person, you must be punching down. It's sort of like, I think you and I talked about how, women, it's sort of cool in feminist circles to complain about men, especially white men, and accuse them of toxic masculinity and manspreading or mansplaining or whatever it is. And that's okay to do because you are by definition punching up. And I find that so counterintuitive because to me, it's like you're actually handing them power that they don't have. And so when people attack you on Twitter, it's sort of ironic because they're actually just sort of reinscribing your power over them. They're assuming that you're some kind of celebrity, that it's okay to be horrible to. Mm-hmm. And so I always, when you do that to somebody, you're really just telling them that they have more power than you do. So the Appalachia thing, it was interesting. And I have to say that when I did the piece, I had totally forgotten that, the word Appalachia, the region, it's a really loaded term. I mean, it connotes, extreme rural poverty, sort of catastrophic social decay. And that's certainly not true of where I am. It's not a wealthy area by any means, but it is not, you know, like what you might imagine. And so in my effort to be cagey about my precise location, I just used that term, and I should have not used it. And I think I might have saved myself about 70 to 80% of the grief.
Wow.
So lesson learned, I guess.
I'm just trying to, can you help me though with this? Like, what's the argument? Like, why should someone stay in New York? I mean, you should leave New York. I mean,
Oh,
that makes
well,
New Yorkers safer, right? I mean, that makes everyone, it's slightly
yeah,
safer.
you're freeing up a hospital bed. Right. Well, they said that you know, the rural hospital system is so taxed that if I were to get sick and take up a ventilator down here, I would be a literal murderer because I was taking away from somebody else. In the meantime, you know, the hospitals here are fairly empty.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
There are two confirmed COVID cases in this county
Two.
to date. So it wouldn't have been a problem if I had been on a ventilator. It would have been a problem for me if I was on a ventilator.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So, I mean, all right. So what do you think is at the root of this kind of thinking? And by the way, this is perfectly consistent with, you know, what you've been dealing with for years, since your dalliance with the intellectual dark web, and you're writing the book, and your disaffection with liberals and feminists and all that, right? I mean, and all the heat you've been getting from those people since you've been criticizing them. Like, what I want to, I'm always just curious about the psychology.
Oh, I'm losing it. Okay.
Oh, you still there?
Am I going out? Yeah, you're freezing up. Oh no.
Am I freezing for other people, or
Can
just,
you hear me?
am I good? Jason,
Yikes.
Landry, am I good?
We can hear both of you. We can hear both of you, or at least
Okay.
I can.
It's just your end, Megan. But we
It's
can hear
frozen
you.
now. Okay, you're back.
Okay, you're fine for us.
Okay. What is this about?
I mean, what's the psychology of these people, do you think? What is the psychology of a person that would cause them to be angry at you, so angry at you that they would denounce you in a public forum for taking a vacation to Virginia?
Yeah. Okay. You're going in and out. I hope it's not my internet connection. I don't know what it is. You know, I think about this all the time. I'd actually be really curious what you guys think the psychology is. There's definitely, I think people are lonely. I mean, we talked about this before. I think that they crave affiliation, and for some reason, affiliation is now connected with grievance. You know, you notice like people in their Twitter bios. Now, obviously, the pronoun thing is big, but that's sort of been covered. You know, I notice now there's like people put their diagnoses, and that, you know, they'll be like, you know, vegetarian, Aquarius, you know, bipolar type 2 or something like that, or, you know, thyroid problem. Like, it's just, you know, we're slicing our identities into thinner and thinner slices that I guess the only way to sort of then assert that identity is to find somebody who has ostensibly insulted you.
Now we lost her. Now we lost you. We were good. Uh-oh. Hopefully we didn't totally lose her.
It's the Appalachian infrastructure. It's just not as good as the coast.
Why do you have to be racist, man? Like, what? Why do you have to talk shit about poor people? Damn, Jason. Oh, man. Well, okay, I'll answer for Megan. Here's what Megan would say. I'm just kidding. She's gonna come back. For those of you watching on YouTube and you want to join these sessions, go to renegadeuniversity.com. This is the first time we've had any problems with the connections, by the way. Is she back?
Okay. Is it just me? It's not. It's not my internet, is it? It shouldn't be.
It is just you.
It is.
That's how bad a person you are.
Ugh.
Yeah, it's just you.
I haven't had any problems here.
Oh yeah? Am I right that it's just her, everyone? Yeah.
Okay.
So, but we heard you totally fine until just then. Until you
heard me. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Psychology.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Appalachian sabotage. I see that. Okay. People asserting their power by asserting their lack of power. it almost makes me wonder if there's a fear of having power in a way. And there's also this kind of like, if you, they don't want to, or they're against sort of any sort of idea of hierarchy. And that's very scary that, to acknowledge that there are natural hierarchies and there are social hierarchies. And this is just sort of, animals have them, people have them. But to sort of even, admit that these exist is to condone them. There's also, there's this phenomenon of like, if you say what is true, you must be saying that it's good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that makes it pretty impossible to have a conversation and solve any problem.
Right.
And I think a lot of the way we're talking about race and gender and identity, it gets really, really hamstrung by these anxieties.
Okay, here's why people hate you. You ready?
Oh, I'm so great. Please.
It's envy.
I hope
it's envy. It's envy. So let me tell you a story. You know who Matt Welch is, right?
Yes, I know him well.
Yeah, right. So like years and years ago, so I wanted to be a journalist before I was a historian, before I was an academic. And I always kind of harbored that, desire. Always sort of like envied journalists in a way. And I remember like, this is way before I'd even heard of Reason, I'd ever heard of Matt Welch or anything, but I finally like stumbled upon him and it. And I remember like looking at his little bio on the masthead in Reason. And it was like a little black and white picture of him like sitting in what looked like a cool bar in downtown Manhattan, like with wood paneling and stuff. And he was like the editor-in-chief of Reason magazine, and I remember looking at that picture, not knowing him at all. He's now a friend of mine, but at the time, and thinking, that motherfucker, like, he doesn't deserve that shit. I should be there. That bastard. He is not as good as, he's not good enough for that. I'm the one who should. It's envy.
You wanted to be the editor of Reason?
I wanted to be the editor of like a magazine. Yeah, not Reason, but like a political magazine. Sure. What's better than that, right? Like to be the editor of a political magazine that's national. Sure. So there you are with all your books and all your nice pictures on all the books, right? And you live in Manhattan. Like, that's it. Say no more. Most people will look at you. They will have no clue about your actual life, but that, 'cause I get the same stuff, right? And they'll look at that and they'll just assume, not without any justification, but mostly without justification, that you are a super fancy, super wealthy, super powerful person.
Oh, I think people think that about anybody who publishes anything.
Yes.
I know, people who write for Salon and, who are people who are writing for digital magazines for $200 a pop,
right,
will get letters saying, oh, you sit there in your Fifth Avenue penthouse.
That's right.
As if that is the template for all wealth. Yeah, I think people do equate being public with being wealthy, and it's kind of a bad combination. I can't think of anything worse. I fall into neither of these categories, but to be very famous and very poor must just be like the worst possible thing.
Yes, I think there's a few of those actually. Yeah. But don't you think envy's a lot? I can't think of any other way to explain the hatred given toward directed at you because of this temporary move to Appalachia.
Oh, well, I have to say, and I went on Katie Herzog and Jesse Singal's really great new podcast, Blocked and Reported, and talked about this. And I think most of the, for this particular Twitter dragging, I think most of it was silly. I do think I made a couple mistakes, and I think I should not have hit the Appalachia thing so hard. I think the piece kind of got framed as, I left New York and here's why. And there's this kind of like headline construction you see on a lot of these web magazines. It's sort of like, I did this and I don't care. And that wasn't literally the construction of the headline, but it was the tonally what it sounded like. So they sort of like, you get kind of teed up as an annoying person just from the headline and the tag. So I think that was a lot of it. I think I could have avoided it by just saying I went to the countryside, but not entirely. And yet, it's funny too. I was thinking about it. It's like, well, how nice for her that she's wealthy enough that she can do that. It's like, I'm 50 years old. And yes, I happen to have an extra $1,000.
Right.
I will cop to that.
Yeah.
But not much more than that.
Right.
So,
Right.
I don't know, once they find my age, they might not be so envious, really.
It's envy. It's envy.
I
mean,
but
so
I
like,
don't know, because but a lot of my, journalist colleagues don't like me anymore either.
that's for a different reason.
For different reasons, yeah.
Because you left the priesthood, right?
Well,
Don't you think?
because yeah, I guess I'm still trying to sort it out. I don't know.
Well, they're mad at you for your politics, right?
I guess so. But the funny thing about it is that we had the same politics until about 5 minutes ago. So I don't know if they're mad at me for my politics as much as they're mad that it's not so easy to have those politics anymore. And by those politics, I guess I mean just sort of basic logic.
So I lost almost all of my friends from college in one fell swoop on Facebook about 10 years ago, when I simply questioned one of them about the world being underwater in the year 2020. 10 years ago, they were saying the world would be underwater in the year 2020. And I said, are you sure about that? It seems sort of unlikely, and what's the evidence, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And it was that was that. Like, they couldn't be friends with me. I had an ex-girlfriend.
All your Facebook friends happen to have this particular view?
All my college friends.
Okay.
Including an ex-girlfriend from college. So I was in my 40s at the time. We hadn't seen each other in like 20 something years. And she writes me and says, I'm sorry, I have to defriend you. I said, why? Because I just can't stand what you're saying on Facebook about climate change. So
who's laughing now? Because we're not underwater.
I know, it's 2020.
Would that we were. Yes.
So I know a little something about being thrown out of the church, or, questioning the church and then getting thrown out, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what's happened to you, don't you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I suppose. I mean, I keep coming back to this. I got into this business because I like to look at the world in a sort of counterintuitive way. And I like to look at the places where people are being hypocritical, where those sort of windows of logic are in the zeitgeist or in people's psychologies, where, they think they're supposed to have one opinion, but they really think something else. Like, to me, that's just sort of like the real meat of human existence and of cognitive existence. And I've always, as a writer, wanted to get at those things, whether it had to do, one of my first pieces ever, I was in my mid-20s. I wrote a piece for the New York Times Magazine about the safe sex message around HIV awareness. And, I don't know, we're probably around the same age. You might remember there was like this period, this little sort of window of time where they were public health. Anthony Fauci was actually instrumental in this. There was such a need to get more funding for AIDS research that they were sort of going around saying, it's an equal opportunity virus. Everyone's going to get this. When I was in college, they said there were lesbians on this campus who were giving HIV to other lesbians. Half of you are going to be dead if you don't wear 15 condoms every time. And so there was this like hyperbole, and it kind of got, absorbed into this aura of style. And Madonna was going around putting like HIV awareness pamphlets in her records, and it was, I would see this all the time. And then in the meantime, I would see people like having unsafe sex in various scenarios. And like, there was this incredible cognitive dissonance. And I wrote a piece trying to get at this. And actually the piece ended up being really bad for various reasons. But, I bring it up as it's really a perfect example of like what makes me excited as a writer. Like, I want to get at those hypocrisies and I want to look at that stuff. And in the 90s, when I started off as a writer, that was the job. That's what you were supposed to do. You were supposed to introduce uncomfortable ideas. You were supposed to push your reader along. You were supposed to say things that were going to make people a little bit angry. And now it's like what you're supposed to do as a writer is the opposite of that. Like, it's as if like the job requirements have been inverted. And what sort of baffles me is to see, my colleagues, people that we used to sit around and talk about this stuff all the time and have these lively conversations. And there was a baseline understanding that we were all, sort of, critical thinking, but, good liberals. And we didn't have, we weren't particularly prejudiced against anybody, and we weren't on the wrong side of history, but we could kind of have these conversations in a way. And it's like not available anymore. And some people seem to think that it's a good thing that that's not available. And I still can't quite figure out why.
Yeah. So I think you and I are unusual, and I think we didn't realize how unusual we were until we were well into our careers. We are unusual, I think, in that we were both attracted to conflict.
But okay, are you attracted to conflict in your personal life or just your sort of public intellectual life?
Oh God, that cuts close. I mean, I've just had a conversation about this. I do find in my personal life, I find myself enmeshed in drama probably more than I need to. It's not conscious. It's not, I don't do it consciously. I know that I don't enjoy it, at least on a conscious level, but I think maybe unconsciously, I push myself toward drama and conflict, but I love watching it. I love listening to it, right? I love intellectual conflict. I love fights.
Right.
I love watching fights. This is one of the reasons why the Trump presidency is so entertaining to me, because it's just nonstop. It's just like professional wrestling, like every day, right? You don't like that kind of conflict. I mean, we don't.
No, it's funny because especially with all these Twitter dragging, like there's this kind of idea of counterphobia, right? So I sort of seem to invite people being angry with me in a public space, but then in my personal life, I hate it when people are mad at me. Like I will do anything for something not to be my fault. Like it's like the building across the street can burn down. This is not even a hypothetical. The building across the street from me burned down. Didn't burn down. It burned. It was a huge fire. And I remember I had this moment where I was like, oh my God, at least that's not my fault. I don't care what happens as long as it's not my fault.
When 9/11 happened, I was kind of like, it kind of is my fault. But anyway,
It kind of, yeah. And it's a weird narcissism too. I mean, like I struggle with guilt a lot. And I think to myself, like, if I had started a fire and burned my building down, I honestly don't think I could go on. And that's a huge, but I also just, in my interpersonal, dealings, I tend to really shy away from conflict, and I don't want anyone to be mad at me. And that's why it's so weird that I'm almost addicted to poking at people on the page. Yeah. And as unpleasant as these Twitter draggings are, there's almost like a hurt so good aspect to it. Like I really sort of, there's something kind of viscerally satisfying about the wrath of Twitter mobs coming down. But I also feel terrible about it.
Yeah, right, exactly. So you said in your piece in Medium about going to Virginia that you had, I forget how you put it, but you had like a guilt complex or some guilt issue, And I
had a lot of guilt about a lot of things, yes, including the puppy. Yeah.
And I do, yeah, right. but I do too. I have a lot of guilt too. But I love watching conflict. I love sort of, so I think that's what we share. But it causes a lot of discomfort, and it makes things difficult in our professional lives, right?
It makes things difficult, but I also, again, I feel like if you're not doing it, why are you in the job? I mean, I hate to keep referring back to Twitter because it's like, it's just Twitter. But unfortunately, if you're talking about the media sphere and journalism, Twitter is that. Yep. I see people just pandering to their readers and just writing the same thing over and over again. And not because the reward system for doing so is so great and the disincentives for not doing it are so great, but it's just boring to me. Like ultimately, I feel like a lot of this discourse, it's just saying obvious things about various, social justice issues. It's just not interesting. Like, constantly harping on how terrible Trump is, it's incredibly boring. We know how terrible Trump is. I have probably watched more CNN in the last 6 weeks than I have in 25 years. The amount of time they spend bashing Trump is like, if they took that away, I think they would have like 2 hours of content a day.
I know.
And to what end?
I know. CNN is really, I don't even know what to do with it. All right, Wendy, you got a question?
You were asking about why you think this happened to you. Obviously, I think it's complicated. I don't think that there's only one thing. And but I would say that probably something that stands out to me is that you're a woman. And you are intelligent. And you're attractive. And there is, I think, in our society, even among educated women, a way in which women are supposed to behave. And if you don't behave that way, you are targeted. And I don't know what to say or what to do about it, but I'm kind of shocked at how I did not experience this my whole professional life. And I spent many years working in corporate America, in technology, and the women there were highly respected, as I was, and I was treated well. And but once I became a mother and I moved out of the city and moved to Long Island, there is just something that bothers, and obviously it's not everybody, but there's something that bothers people about women who have an opinion, who are intellects, who are not interested in talking about, baby diapers and play dates, and it makes people uncomfortable. So I would say that that's the main thing. I mean, to me, I think that's why Hillary did not win the election, because she just wasn't likable. She did not have the personality, this warm, fuzzy, kind of a little ditzy type of person that she needed to be in order to win. And, she just appeared too serious. She has this, she doesn't smile all that much, and she's not into small talk. She wants to get right into the issues and talk about those things and get to solutions and what do we do about it? How do we fix this? Enough with the bullshit. If you're that type of woman, it's going to be held against you. And that's just the reality. So that's the way I see it.
Wow. Okay. Let me just break in real quickly. This is going to be interesting for me. I can't wait to hear what Meghan says in response to this, because it's more complicated for her, right? Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's actually, the thing with female candidates, I reported a piece last fall about Elizabeth Warren, and I was interviewing a lot of sort of pollsters and political strategists. And, the thing about women candidates is, the polling just consistently shows that they have to be likable. They have to be seen as both competent and likable, and male candidates can get away with just being competent. And so it's really hard to combine those two things. I mean, we do, how often have you thought like, oh, is this guy likable? But it also, just as an aside, I think there's also data that shows that once women do decide to run, they win as often as men. It's just that it takes a lot more for them to get to the place where they're going to decide to run. Anyway, but so actually, Wendy, what you said is really it's really thought provoking, because there's a lot of layers there. I do think you're right. I was a columnist for the Los Angeles Times from 2005 to 2015, basically. And I got a lot of people being mad at me. And I would say that most of the angry male, this was, kind of before social media, I started doing this. A lot of the angry letters, they tended to be from men tend to be from older men. Those are the people who read the newspaper, for one thing. So that was just sort of a demographic issue. But I probably got more of it than some male columnists. So there was sort of that piece of it. I think you're right. What I have run into in the last, say, 5 years, since my break from the priesthood, as Thad says, is more anger from women. But that is because, what sort of brought me to this place of questioning the leftist orthodoxy where I was parting ways with contemporary feminism. Like, I, as a woman, was really not, I was not resonating with a lot of the feminism that was being expressed on social media, for instance, this idea of punching up to men and that there's toxic masculinity and men are terrible. So that's where I sort of went off the reservation. So I think a lot of women are upset with me. I will say that because I am a woman, I am granted more slack in pushing back against this liberal orthodoxy, because at least I have that box checked. Right. Like, my one saving grace in all of this is that I'm not a white man.
Right.
I think white women are the new white men. We're getting pretty close there. Yay! We've achieved equality.
Yeah.
In terms of being problematic. But yeah, if I was a white man and saying a lot of what I say, I would be absolutely silenced. I mean, I wouldn't be able to talk about women. I mean, part of the problem with this discourse, because of this sort of standpoint theory, right? You're not allowed, by the sort of Twitter rules, by the intersectionality rules, whatever intersectionality means, you're not allowed to speak for any group of which you're not a member. So, I would not really be able to critique, feminism, obviously, if I were a man. So at least I have that. But I'm certainly not allowed to talk about race, for instance. So I have to kind of stick with what I am. But Wendy, I think you raise really good points. I mean, this sort of problem is intersectional. It really is. I think that's a fair application of intersectionality, which is a massively misapplied concept. But I think in that case, it does apply.
Well, Wendy, do you have a follow-up?
Sorry. The other thing I was going to say is that I think that it's not all men. I think that, there are many men who love women and who like talking to women and who like intelligent women. And I do agree with you that there is an inhumanity. There's a book actually called Women's Inhumanity to Women. And I think that being tragic. Yeah, it's written by Phyllis Chesler, who is one of the original feminists. If you want to pick up any of her books, she's been around for many, many years. And she wrote over a dozen books. And I also think that social media, computers, technology just makes everything exponential. So if you irritate someone, for example, because they don't like the way you look, they don't like the fact that you don't smile enough, or whatever it is, that's the thing that they're going to notice. And then they're going to post it on social media, and all of a sudden it becomes gospel. So now everybody sees you as the person. This is what Trump does. That's so genius about him. He takes a person and he picks something idiosyncratic about them, and then all of a sudden he destroys them overnight. Sleepy Joe and Pocahontas, and I can go on and on, but it works. And so that's just the way people think. And I don't know how you resolve that, especially not in a world where there's just too much technology. I'm not saying that's a bad thing.
No, I think you're right. I think that social media it plays a huge role in this. I have this out with my students all the time. There are so many things that they want to say, that they want to write, that they want to express. They won't do it because they're afraid of getting destroyed on social media before they're even out of the gate professionally. And my heart breaks for them, honestly. If social media had been around when I was starting out my career, I wouldn't be the writer that I am. I don't know if I would be a writer at all. I was pretty ballsy back then, but I don't think any 22-year-old, unless you're like a sort of sociopath, is going to just want to be hated right out of the gate. It won't work. It's not intellectually, it's not feasible. And so it's almost impossible, I think, to be intellectually honest when you're starting out your career in this moment. And to me, that's really the scariest thing about our moment. It's not these people, it's not the campus protesters. It's not people, having silly arguments about identity. It is this sort of fundamental problem of discourse. And that is, to me, the problem with everything, is that there's a conversational chokehold. And it's really silencing all the interesting and necessary conversations.
So we have several people who want to talk on this, including me. And I think there's a conflict maybe between what Wendy said and the thesis of your book, which I want to maybe tease out a bit here. But we're going to do that in the private session. So if you're watching on YouTube and you want to join our U Lives in the future, go to renegadeuniversity.com and become a member at any level. And we'll stop the recording now.